So you're playing Genshin, you're doing some 10 pulls, and while you don't get a 5-star, you do get 4-star Rosaria. Now, what do you get with Rosaria besides a questionable none? Well, Rosaria is a polar molding cryo user who can actually fill a lot of slots in a couple different teams. And in this video, we're going to look at the basics of Rosaria. Now, first, we're going to look at the normal attacks of Rosaria. And this one kind of actually matters because Rosaria is actually the fastest polearm normal attack user in the game. I believe she's the fastest. If she's not the fastest, she is one of the fastest. Her normal attacks are very, very fast. And her charge attack is the corkscrew version of the charge attack for polearms. Now, her skill is going to actually kind of move her behind your targeted enemy and is going to do an instance of cryo damage. It is going to hit them once and then it's going to kind of do like an AoE and kind of hit any enemy around you. Now, it does move behind smaller enemies, but it doesn't move behind larger enemies like bosses, right? That is just going to kind of move you forward in the direction that you're facing or move you towards the enemy. It's not going to actually go behind the enemy in that instance. Now, her skill does work with her first passive, in which case whenever she strikes an opponent from behind using her skill, Rosaria's crit rate is going to increase by 12% for 5 seconds. Notice how it only says from behind. So it's going to be very difficult to trigger this on bosses because it's not going to put you behind the enemy on its own. You're going to actually have to position yourself a little bit more against larger enemies like bosses. But really, in Rosaria's kit, her skill is only really used to kind of generate energy for her. The main component of her kit is actually going to be her burst. What her burst is going to do is that her burst is going to make this giant ice lance come down from the sky, hitting enemies in an AoE, dealing cryo damage, but then it's also going to pulse out cryo damage, intermittently hitting anything within its AoE. Now, this also works with her other passive, where whenever this is on the field, it is actually going to share Rosaria's crit rate with your other team members. 15% of Rosaria's crit rate is going to be passed on to the rest of your team, maxing out at 15%. So if you have 100% crit rate on Rosaria, you can give 15% crit rate to the rest of your team. So you can kind of use her as a crit rate support or buffer in a weird instance. And I don't really think that there's any other characters whose burst without constellations that give either a crit rate or a crit damage buffer. So this is actually really, really good. So you could, for instance, be using her with like Risley, where you're going to be having like Marshmallow Hunter on him anyway, and then you're going to get an extra 15% with 100% crit rate, meaning that you can get 36 plus 15, being 51% crit rate on Risley without ever having another crit rate substat on him if you were to use like Rosaria with him. You could also do it with like Gomming, where you're going to be doing some melt Gomming stuff. You could do that and pass more crit rate onto him. You're also going to be using Marshmallow Hunter with him, so this can just get a little bit more crit rate over to Gomming. So you can do a lot of stuff with Rosaria. Now, this burst does do a lot of damage on its own, so you can actually build her to be a very good buffer, support, and off-field DPS, kind of all together in one. Now, that's kind of it for her kit. She doesn't have a very complicated kit, but having that crit rate buff is actually really, really cool. And there's not really a lot of other characters that have a crit buff with them without constellations. We will talk about our constellations a little bit further in the video, but this is a really interesting kind of thing to have for a C0 character. Now we're going to look at artifacts, and artifacts are going to be very dependent on the exact kind of build that you're wanting to put on Rosaria. Now, you might have spotted at the very beginning that I had Dragon Spine Spear on Rosaria when talking about normal attacks, but then swapped to something else. That is because if we look at the artifact set that I have on her Pale Flame, this is not a normal artifact set for Rosaria. This is a very niche kind of on-field physical damage Rosaria build that I'm just playing with and having fun with, right? So I do not actually recommend these artifacts on Rosaria. I do recommend them on her if you want to do this kind of niche build that I'm doing, but in a normal instance, Pale Flame's not really going to go on Rosaria. It's a very, very special instance. Now, for ones that I actually do recommend, Emblem is going to be phenomenal. Emblem is very, very good for her. This is a way that you can build her to be a crit rate buffer and do really good off-field cryo damage because it's going to increase her energy recharge, and then it's going to increase the damage of her burst based on her energy recharge. So this is going to be... I've been pointing the wrong way. Why didn't you guys tell me? Why didn't you guys tell me that I was pointing the wrong way? Emblem. It's going to increase energy recharge. It's going to increase the burst damage of her from based on her energy recharge. And this is going to go really good with one of the weapons that we're going to talk about. This is a really good artifact set for off-field damaging Rosaria. This is really, really good. And you can still build a fair good amount of crit rate to where she can still buff the crit rate of your entire team with this set. Now, another option is going to be Noblesse. Now, this is going to be her best support artifact set. It's going to increase burst damage, and it's going to give an attack buff to your entire team once you've used your burst. So you can do an attack buffer And you can do a crit rate buffer with Rosaria on this artifact set, and this is going to be very, very good. You aren't really caring about her damage that ton. It's mainly going to be buffing the rest of your team. Now, if you want to be really cheeky and you want to run like a reverse melt Rosaria, you can run like 4-piece Gilded on her to get as much EM as possible from the set, so that way you can kind of focus on attack and do a lot of weird reverse melts through her burst. This is a little bit more niche, but you can do it. And then you do also have Blizzard Strayer, which is going to get up her cryo damage, and then it's going to increase her own crit rate based on if the enemy is affected with cryo, if they're frozen, and then you can also kind of build cryo resonance in there, so you can get a ton of crit rate just from Blizzard Strayer alone, and then focus everything else into crit damage. And this is going to be more specific for like a freeze Rosaria team. Now for the main stats, you do have a couple of different options, right? So it's going to really depend on what kind of set you're running. So if you're running Emblem, then you're going to be doing like energy recharge, because you want energy recharge, so that way her burst does more damage and you can use her burst more often. If you're doing something like Noblesse, then you also may want to do energy recharge, because this is going to be more of a support Rosaria. If you're going to be doing damage Rosaria, then probably you're going to be running attack percent and just trying to get as much ER and substats as you can. Now you can also do an Elemental Mastery Sands if you're trying to do like a reverse melt, but again, that's going to be a little bit more niche. You're probably going to be sticking with ER or attack over anything else. For the goblet, you're going to be running a cryo damage goblet almost always, unless you're doing something stupid like me and running the Pale Flame physical damage Rosaria, in which case you would do physical damage. And then of course for the circlet, you're going to be doing crit rate or crit damage, most likely a crit rate, especially if you're trying to get her for support and try to hit that 100% crit rate to pass crit rate to your other team members, then you're most likely going to be running a crit rate circlet. Now if you're trying to get her own personal damage up and not necessarily caring about passing her crit rate onto other characters, then you'd probably be doing like a crit damage one. Now for weapons, I did say that I was running Dragon Spine Spear at the beginning. That's great for that niche team. Other than that, Deathmatch is actually really, really good, and it's what I swapped her to. It's going to get up a ton of crit rate and attack percent. Now, her best weapon, especially with Emblem, is going to be the Catch. The Catch is phenomenal. It's going to increase energy recharge, which is great. It's going to increase her elemental burst damage and her elemental burst crit rate. Now, because that crit rate from the passive only affects her burst damage, it doesn't affect her overall crit rate, so you can't pass that on. It's only going to affect the burst crit rate, the crit burst. Like I said, Deathmatch is also good. More than anything, this can just kind of be like a really good crit rate stack stick, and you can use the passive. Now, of course, you do always have something like Favonius Lance, where if somebody like Zhangling or Raiden is using the Catch, but you still want to use Rosaria in another team, then Favonius Lance can be very good, and she'll be able to use that passive of the crits generating particles for her, because you're going to be building her crit rate anyway, because most likely that's going to be a support build. If you need another kind of 3-star crit stack stick, try saying that 5 times fast. Almost tried it. White Tassel is going to be good. It's just going to get up a kind of crit rate. She might be able to use the normal attack buffer, but it's mainly going to be for that crit rate. Now, with me trying to run that crazy on-field physical Rosaria, I do have C6. I would not be trying it without C6. I do have C6, and because of that, we're going to go look at her Constellations. Number 1, when Rosaria deals a crit hit, I can swap back over this side. When Rosaria deals a crit hit, her attack speed and her normal attack damage is increased by 10%. Number 2, the duration of her burst is going to be increased by 4 seconds. Number 4 is going to be whenever her skill scores a critical hit, it's going to regenerate some energy for her. Number 5 is going to increase the level of her burst. Number 6, her burst is going to decrease the enemy's physical resistance by 20% for 10 seconds, making the on-field DPS physical Rosaria more plausible. And this also makes her really, really good with Eula for more reasons than just the C6, but still, she can be very, very good with Eula at C6. Now, this on-field physical Rosaria is something that I am going to try and do with Chi-Chi on like Clam set, where we're going to be causing superconduct reactions, using Lisa to kind of attack buff with Thrilling Tales and drop defense with her burst, and then Fischl also doing a fair good amount of damage on her own. So I am really going to try and make this team work. I would love, love, love to make this team work. I got to get a Clam set for Chi-Chi, and I got to get Rosaria built a little bit more, but I'm definitely going to try and get this team to work. Now that is going to be it for this video. Rosaria has, I think, red hair. Kuki has green hair. I have blue hair that was just redyed today, and I will see you in the next one.